6:21 in Trinidad and Tobago. As we delve into the politics a bit with our first guest via Zoom. He is David Abdulah, leader of the MSJ, the Movement for Social Justice. Very good morning to you, David. Thanks very much for joining us. There are lots of issues in the political domain, but I'd like you to address the issue that many people raise, and I've asked you this before, but it needs reiterating, that some will say that airtime is precious, and why should it be wasted on you?
Good morning, Fazia. Morning edition TV6. Well, I think that I have earned the right to speak, quite apart from having a right to speak. I think I've earned the right to contribute to the ideas for the development of Trinidad and Tobago over very many years of being active, first in the students' movement, labor movement, in politics, doing work with a huge range of NGOs, civil society, people involved in the arts, and so on. So I think I have an appreciation of our society, and have through that developed ideas about how we could bring about fundamental change. So I think that is the important thing. It's not simply my being MSJ or political leader of MSJ. I think it's also all that I've done that I think can contribute and my engagement with a lot of people on the ground over very many years in very many different communities, and my ability to reach out to different sectors of the national community.
But as we see from the numbers, election after election, David Abdulah, that doesn't translate into an electorate that is buying into that philosophy, whatever that philosophy might be.
Yes, and that is because of our deeply entrenched culture of party politics in the country, which culture, we have discussed this so many times, which culture is linked to the politics of race and religion and geography where people live and so on. Their sense of identity and people trying to find identity through politics and through the parties, the two traditional parties, and thinking that will get them to a better place, which of course historically it has not done. So it is a fight against the culture and the tradition of a society, and some of us have to row that boat, apparently against the tide, but at certain key moments in time, it swings in the other direction. The tide swings in the other direction and swings very, very significantly. It has done so in the past, and it can do so again.
Talking about rowing the boat, whether you're against the tide or with the tide, which boat are you in as far as this issue with the visit of the Venezuelan vice president on March 27th? We heard the strident, long-winded defense of Stuart Young yesterday of the government's position on this. We heard from the former Prime Minister, leader of the opposition. A few days earlier, we heard accusations of being a traitor, which has prompted legal action from what we understand. Where do you sit on this matter?
Well, as soon as Dr. Maduro made his first statement and wrote to the U.S. ambassador, the MSJ issued a statement under my name saying that the UNC, in fact, were acting as a fifth column. And a fifth column, by definition, is a group that seeks to undermine from within a larger majority. And in our view, by going to the U.S. embassy, and I heard you yourself mentioning that, by going to the U.S. embassy and to the ambassador, it was an indication of persons from within seeking to undermine our territorial and national sovereignty and our right to self-determination. It is one thing for an opposition, and they have the right to do so, to criticize as strongly as they wish the government in power and vice versa, and the right of every citizen to criticize both government, opposition, and others. But it is a quite different thing to go to another state to seek succor and support from another state against your own state. That's a ball game, a completely different ball game, and that is why we said they're acting as a fifth column, and we maintain that position. Now, what has come out yesterday, should I think have been that statement made by Minister Young yesterday, ought to be made by the Prime Minister on Friday, following the statement by Mrs. Prasad Bissessar, because I think some facts were put forward by Minister Young yesterday. And I don't know that anyone can say that those are not, what he said was not true. For example, he said that Mr. Chavez, with whom the Prime Minister, Minister Moses, and Minister Young met with, together with Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, was not an official of PDVSA on the 26th or 27th of March, but he became an official of PDVSA 1 month and 1 day afterwards. So that a huge part of Mrs. Prasad's argument has fallen flat. Now, the photographs that appeared in the media, which apparently were not photographs of the meeting of March at all. And so there were a lot of things that were going out there which would have given a view or impression that suggested that something was amiss. The issue of the contract, of course, we haven't seen the contract, but Mr. Young went on record yesterday saying that the contract between Carrier and the company to which it sold fuel was included in that contract was a clause which said there must be no onward sale to a sanctioned country. So I think that a lot was cleared up in yesterday's statement. Unfortunately, that statement ought to have been made on Friday by the Prime Minister. It would have ruled out a lot of speculation. But I also believe several other things. One is that the UNC is operating on certain premises. They're operating on the premise that Juan Guaido is the president of Venezuela. They took that position a year ago, right after Juan Guaido declared himself to be president, and after the United States recognized Juan Guaido as president, which he is not. And the UNC jumped on that bandwagon. The United Nations does not recognize Juan Guaido as president. The United Nations recognizes Nicolas Maduro as the president of Venezuela. CARICOM recognizes Nicolas Maduro as the president of Venezuela. There are a few CARICOM countries that are part of the Lima group, but CARICOM as a whole recognizes has a position of the United Nations. So the UNC's position is not consistent with the formal international recognition of the government of Venezuela. And then, Dr. Munidal jumped on the bandwagon, which is the Trump bandwagon, that Maduro is a narco trafficker and an illegitimate governor and so on. Well, if he wishes to parrot that line, perhaps he would also wish to parrot all of the remedies that Mr. Trump has offered for the solution of the COVID-19 virus, all of which solutions Trump has parroted have turned out to be very bad and misinformation, particularly this last one, which I wouldn't go bother to repeat. All of us are well aware of the disinfectant issue. So we have to recognize that the U.S. has an agenda. That agenda is regime change of Venezuela, which it wishes to achieve by any means necessary, including military action. Mr. Trump and Mr. Pompeo, Secretary of State, have said as much. And the issue, for example, of what happened last week Sunday, which has not received much media coverage, but which is a very important issue of mercenaries landing in Venezuela last week Sunday morning. A number of them being apprehended, including at least two U.S. citizens employed by a company called Silvercore. And the principal of that company, Mr. Goudreau, operating out of Miami, Mr. Jason Goudreau, has admitted that these were his employees. He has admitted to contracts being signed by persons, including Juan Guaido, for the training of troops and involvement of a mercenary invasion coming out of Colombia, admitting to arms being gathered for that purpose and so on. This is important, and I want to know what the UNC's position is on that, because certainly the MSJ condemns a mercenary violent attack on Venezuela. We believe that there are deep-rooted problems in Venezuela, both economic and social, as well as political divisions, and those problems can only be solved by way of peaceful negotiation and dialogue, which CARICOM, and we congratulated CARICOM on that initiative, pursued with the Montevideo mechanism and the involvement of the government of Norway in trying to bring the warring factions together in Venezuela to find a way forward. That's the only way, and we support CARICOM's position of a peaceful resolution, and that this region must be a zone of peace.
Am I hearing you correctly, David Abdulah? Is it that your philosophical position in strident support of the Maduro administration forces you to define the words of Stuart Young yesterday as the definitive voice of authority?
Well, no, it hasn't forced me to accept Mr. Young's voice as the authority.
But you basically said voice. So. You said we have to take Stuart Young at his word.
Yeah, what I said is that statement which he made seemed to be a statement outlining facts in the matter which ought to have been disclosed to the public quite some time ago, and certainly... Well,
allow me to jump in again immediately, David Abdulah. Are we expected to believe, as we heard from the Prime Minister on Friday in response to Kamala Persad Bissessa, that he did not know the identity of people involved in that meeting, and we are expected to accept that?
Well, there were only 5 people, according to Mr. Young, in that meeting, and certainly the Prime Minister ought to have known and would have known the identity of the 2 persons with whom he met. And those 2 persons, according to Mr.
No,
Young,
David, hold on a moment. Correct
Yes.
me if I'm wrong, but he said at that press conference, I am now learning that this person is so-and-so. I am now learning that this person is Asdrubal Chavez. So out of the Prime Minister's own mouth was confirmation that he did not know at least 1 or 2 of the people who he was sitting down there with.
Yes, and that to me is not appropriate. If you're meeting with 2 people and there are 3 people on your side, then quite clearly you would know who the 2 people you're meeting with. Desi Rodriguez is known, and he ought then to have known who the second member of the Venezuelan delegation was in the room. There apparently, according to Mr. Young, were others who were not in the room, and the Prime Minister would not have necessarily known who those other persons were, but certainly you're meeting with 2 people. Whether the designation of that individual was well identified, I can't say. Normally you would, in introduction, say, well, you know, this is Minister of Foreign Affairs, this is Minister of National Security, and normally the person on the other side leading the delegation would say, with me is Mr. or Miss so-and-so, who is a person doing X, Y, and Z. And therefore that wouldn't be known. If you meet in that kind of small setting with 2 other people in the room, yes, you ought to have known. And this is why I'm saying that the Prime Minister's statement on Friday, what ought to have been the statement made by Mr. Young yesterday. And so it did create, and it has created, the space for confusion and other things and mischief that is about this.
And indeed, I take the point about the UNC and their own spin on things and run into the US and all of that. And that's why I asked the question in that context, because I think people who know you publicly would be well aware of your philosophy. And therefore, does that create that conflict where you find yourself having to align yourself with the view of the government, even in a situation where there are lots of questions to be asked because of the bigger issue of appearing to kowtow to the demands of the U.S. administration, which considers their law to be the law, even if it is not international law. And that's why I'm asking, in the same way that we heard from Kafra Kambon over the last few days in his letter to the editor, which basically said that if you're going to sell gas to Venezuela, just do it secretly. Don't let nobody know. Are you in that same boat?
Our position is, well, there are several issues there, so let me try to disaggregate some of the issues that you have identified. First of all, our position is one that we stand on principles. So we stand in terms of international relations for the respect for the sovereignty of another state and for the non-interference in the internal affairs of another state by a third country. So that is the principles on which we stand. If the government of Trinidad and Tobago, whoever that government may be, takes a position that is consistent with those principles, we will support the government in its foreign relations positions on the basis of those principles. If they took a position that repudiates us in contradiction to those principles, we will be highly critical of that government, whoever that government may be. So our position of support for the position of the government of Trinidad and Tobago and of CARICOM in its relationship with Venezuela is on the basis of the principles of international relations and the norms of international relations, which the MSJ as a party subscribes to. And if we were in government, we would adhere to those same principles of international relations, which are well established and enable particularly small states to survive in a world of superpowers that have their agendas. Because unless as small states that we assert respectfully without shouting, engaging in a shouting match and so on, with the United States or anyone else, unless we assert our right to self-determination, to sovereignty and non-interference in our affairs, then we'll be put at huge risk as a people and as a country trying to pursue our own path of development. So we stand on that principle, and that's the first point. And if the government took a correct position in its relationship with Venezuela and any other country, we will support that position, regardless of the internal differences that we may have with the PNM government or any other party that may be in power in Trinidad and Tobago. Internally, we will criticize if they take a position that is consistent with principle. Internationally, we will support that position. Now, the other issue is that of sanctions. The point must be made that these sanctions are not internationally recognized sanctions. These sanctions were not approved by the United Nations, whether it be in the Security Council or the General Assembly. These sanctions were unilaterally imposed by the United States. Some of the European Union countries have also supported the sanctions, but not all of the sanctions the US has imposed, the European Union have supported. But these are unilaterally imposed sanctions, inconsistent with the United Nations Charter. And so we must recognize that. Now, on the other hand, so there is what one could call the de facto, the reality, the political and economic reality, that the United States has said they have imposed sanctions. That's a reality. The de jure, or the legal situation, is, as the U.S. Embassy itself admitted in a statement to the Express, I think it was, that appeared in Saturday's newspaper, the U.S. Embassy said that whether or not the sanctions comply with international law or are consistent with the laws of Trinidad and Tobago or any other state, they don't care. It is their sanctions, and they will impose them. So that is the position of a bully. And we have to say to the bully that we don't recognize your sanctions, but at the same time, given the fact that we are a small state, we ought not to engage in activity that would bring down the bully's actions on us. So we have to tread that line of respectfully saying to the bully, you are wrong, because if we don't say that, when it applies to another country, then when it comes to us, there'll be nobody to defend us, and we wouldn't be able to have a leg up to defend ourselves either. So we have to say to the bully that you are wrong, but at the same time, we have to be aware that the bully has power and can take action against us that is punitive. And we have to walk that line. But we have to recognize that the sanctions are not international sanctions, as sanctions, for example, were international against South Africa during the apartheid regime, which sanctions the United States and Britain broke with impunity, because Thatcher and Reagan had no difficulty engaging with the white racist regime of South Africa.
David, I'll just ask you to pause for a moment, because I know it's a very involved topic, but we just have to fulfill a commercial obligation, and then we'll come right back with our discussion. .641 in Trinidad and Tobago. A few technical glitches that we're just trying to work through. We do apologize for that if it puts you off in any way. But let's return to our discussion with the leader of the MSJ, the Movement for Social Justice, David Abdulah. We want to get to the issue of the COVID-19 recovery team, the issue of indeed the gradual reopening of businesses. We've heard from some business sectors complaining about what they see as basically a situation that could virtually run them out of business. But David Abdulah, you wanted to finish your point in relation to this entire matter of the USA's perspective and their hegemony in our region.
Yes, thank you, Fazil. You know, the USA's position on sanctions unilaterally imposed is exposed on the issue of sanctions on Iran, because there was an agreement negotiated by the Obama administration and many governments in Europe and so on with Iran for a no-nuclear Iran, and Iran agreed to it. Sanctions were removed. And then Mr. Trump said the deal was a bad deal. He unilaterally withdrew from it, repudiated it, and then imposed sanctions on Iran, simply to, maybe to diss Obama, to use our popular language, to undermine everything that Obama did and undo everything that Obama did, but also as a punitive way. And that's an example of this action of a bully. And on the other hand, they have really no moral authority. The United States has no moral authority when they supported dictatorships. So the issue of democracy is not for them. They supported dictatorships throughout Latin America in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. So they have no moral authority to talk about democracy. in this region. And we have to always recognize the interests of the U.S., and we also have to recognize what are in our interests and so on. So I just wanted to conclude on that. With respect to the issue of recovery, on Friday we launched our proposal, our roadmap for recovery and change in Trinidad and Tobago, because we don't think it's simply a matter of recovery, but this is an opportunity to make fundamental change in our country. And we heard the Prime Minister's address or statement to the media and the country on Saturday, identifying businesses which could be restarted. We think that the Prime Minister could have gone somewhat further. There are a number of other businesses, bookshops, for example, copy centers, people involved in gardening and landscaping, which essentially is outdoor, one or two people engaged outdoor with physical distancing. Those activities could have been restarted. And we ourselves have other timelines, slightly different timelines for the reopening of small businesses. We also believe that there needs to be specific financial support, and which we will publicize in terms of providing relief from the business levy and the Green Fund for certain size businesses for the rest of this year going into next year. And also that the salaries or wages of employees of certain size companies should be paid by the state up to a certain amount, $2,500, but through the company's payroll. So that those companies that are not identified in BIR or NIS's net will then have to join those two institutional legal frameworks for them to benefit from not having to pay their employees directly, but get the employees paid by the state. And there are a number of other measures that we have identified, which we think would help small business and to some extent medium-sized businesses, and get some aspects of the economy and the business sector reopened a little quicker than that identified by the Prime Minister, without jeopardizing the health situation. But all of our recommendations we see as subject to the professional advice of the health professionals, and subject to the fact that all these businesses can ensure that there are the proper protocols for hygiene of people entering and working in their places of business and are observed. And we also recommend the mandatory wearing of masks once one is out in a public space.
But David Abdulah, do we even know where we are as far as COVID-19 if the testing has only covered 0.015% of the population? Can we even talk definitively or confidently about anything about COVID-19?
Not definitively. I don't think there's any country in the world, Fazir, that could speak definitively. There has been, after the reopening of business activity in Germany, there has been a bit of a resurgence of COVID cases in Germany, which was one of the best managed areas. South Korea similarly, and some other places where it was managed fairly carefully. So nobody can be absolutely sure about it at this moment, which is why we need to have caution. Now, I agree with you on the issue of the fact that we've had relatively minimal testing. On the other hand, if there were quite a few more cases of people with significant symptoms of COVID, they would have been in the healthcare system. They would have ended up going to the health centers or to the hospitals and would have been tested and would have been under care. And then those persons would have had contact tracing, which would have identified others. So the fact that we don't have a lot of persons who have come forward with significant symptoms is an indication that it is relatively under control. But of course, there can be many persons out there. I have no idea what number many is, but there could be persons out there who are either asymptomatic, that is, they have no symptoms, or they have very mild symptoms, and therefore have not gone to a health center, hospital, or to their private doctor for treatment, and therefore have not been captured in either testing or hospitalization. And that is why I think the government has, on the advice of the healthcare professionals, Dr. Parsham and his team, they have been very cautious, so that with opening up, if new people show up for treatment, then they will know that the virus is out there, and they could try to identify the numbers of persons who have it and deal with it accordingly.
David, time has run out on us at this time. So many issues that we could develop even further, but time doesn't allow us at this time to develop. But you can rest assured that given the many issues that are floating around in the politics of Trinidad and Tobago, that we should have another opportunity to return to that discussion. Thanks very much once again for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you very much, Hans.
David Abdulah, the leader of the Movement for Social Justice, offering his perspective there. 6:48 in Trinidad and Tobago. As we go to the break, here's another image for you. This one is from Mahadev Singh. I don't know if it's Mr. or Miss or Mrs., but it's a fern, and a luxurious fern that might be even more luxuriant with the rains that we would have had overnight. Looks as if we're in that transition period between dry season into rainy season. And thanks very much for that image from Kuva. As we go to the break at 6:49, we'll be right back.